Millwall Rovers was founded in 1885 on the Isle of Dogs in London's East End. The early teams played on sites around Millwall Dock, earning them the nickname of the Dockers. They came from a background of poverty, hard work and danger, where toughness was necessary for survival. The Isle of Dogs, cut off by the docks, was poor, but proud of its isolation. It saw itself as separate and different. In the 1880s, the working classes of Britain became football mad, or at least the men. For most women, Saturday afternoon off meant housework and childcare, not leisure. Millwall were a local works team at Morton's food factory. Many of the workers had come from Scotland in search of work, bringing with them their colours, blue and white, their flag, the Cross of St. Andrew, and their symbol, the lion rampant. Despite early success, the club remained poor. The directors' lack of ambition in not joining the Football League meant that they long remained a low-status local team. This was a time when hard-working men got together for football and a drink on their Saturday afternoons. In those early days, the team was sponsored by local pubs, like the George, often owned by club shareholders who profited by their association with football. But in search of bigger crowds and higher revenue, the directors deserted the island and moved south across the Thames to Deptford. The Den opened in 1910. Despite their anger at not being consulted, many supporters from the Isle of Dogs remained loyal.
My family come from the Isle of Dogs, the original Millwall, and his father supported Millwall from the foundation of the club. My father came down here with his brothers, and I think it was 1910 when they come to the Den. They just carried on from there. They used to walk through the foot tunnel at Greenwich and come through, and that's how it's all started.
The new supporters from Bermondsey, Rotherhithe, Deptford had a similar background. Most were Dockers, vocal in their support and renowned for speaking their minds. Football fever continued to dominate the free time of huge numbers of working-class men and boys.
With them. It's a damn nuisance out here every day.
You're doing
I don't know, but come on in there, you. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Get in there,
Don't you let me get you going.
Get in there. This policeman's going to lock you up. Go on.
You go.
Never mind inside.
My father first brought me down here in 1920s, late, and I was a youngster. And because I straight away I took to watching Millwall, and it stuck in my blood. It's like being inoculated. I got the jab, and that was it. And then I started coming down here and supporting them when I had the time off. I played football a bit myself, but of course I still had my thoughts for Millwall. I used to live and sleep in Millwall. There's photographs all around the wall, indoors and what have you.
A record crowd packed into the Millwall ground for the only cup tie in London, and before the game began, hundreds left their places and ran to find better seats. Order was restored after a time, and then the teams came out. First Millwall, while the crowd surged and swayed like a wheat field in a wind. Then the white-jerseyed men from the north, Derby County.
At last, Millwall were in the Football League, and they maintained their reputation for cup challenges, as in the 5th round against Derby County in 1937.
Thrills came early. A vigorous attack by Derby found the Millwall goal in danger. A shot. But it went safely into the crowd. Again, the onlookers got restive and rushed across the pitch. Then once more the play got really exciting and the spectators got all worked up. A few minutes later came the first goal for Derby. A battering attack found Keane in possession and he scored.
It became common for huge crowds to gather at the Den, and in cinema newsreels of the period, we get a glimpse of those supporters.
Shortly afterwards, Millwall
The present capacity is 24,000, but in 1937, crowds of 47,000 were packed into the same small stadium.
Battling for that extra goal to get into round 6. It seemed that Millwall had it. From the centre, the ball went to Magnall, who popped it into the Derby net, but it was offside. Are you still eating? At last, Millwall's persistent attack had its reward. McCartney took the ball and nicked it in.
They were crowds whose enthusiasm literally knew no bounds.
And for a finish, the crowd ran wild, bursting over the pitch in a crazy, chaotic mess. A cup tie never witnessed any more amazing scenes.
Just fantastic. The Lions roared, and they would roar from kick-off to the final whistle. And this lifted the team, of course, and they always said the Millwall roar was worth a goal start.
Been a Millwall supporter for 67 years. We wish you many, many more happy seasons down here at the Den with us.
Millwall's early directors, like the brothers Fred and Tom Thorne, were skilled workers and small businessmen. They established a tradition of local traders who have controlled and manipulated the club's finances and fortunes. They were greatly protective of their position, some of them founding dynasties of directors. Running a club gave local prestige and a stage on which to build business contacts. Today, the Over 50s club meets in the Executive Lounge. In the past, supporter involvement was unheard of. Increased investment in the club began after the Cup run of 1937, with directors winning tenders for ground improvements. The supporters were treated as mere fee-paying customers, with only a limited covering being provided over concrete terracing. The directors built themselves a boardroom with a bar, offices, a palm court, and a lounge for the wives of business contacts. Facilities were poor and have remained poor.
The terraces were crumbly, the toilets were in poor shape. I think we put up with it just to see our football team, Millwall.
The facilities in general are not worth that much. Quite honestly, I've been to other London clubs. The toilets here are a disgrace. I mean, they've got one over there, they've got one at the back here. You go out here at half-time and you see men making water up against the wall. They can't get in the toilet, they're lining up to get in the toilet.
After the war, there was little change. When it came to rebuilding the bomb-damaged terraces, the directors still saw no clash of interest in awarding contracts to themselves.
I worked for one of the directors here, Mr. Winders, Mr. Bill Winders. He was one of the directors here. And I worked for a still firm on the Isle of Dogs. And I think he got here through Mr. Thorne. He was another director. There was two brothers, Thorne brothers. And I think they introduced him here. Because when it got bombed down the other end of the ground here, they said, our firm done all the steelwork here and put the steelwork in.
They called themselves Millwall Football and Athletic Club Limited, and they were not duty bound to produce a balance sheet, and nobody ever knew where the money went or where it was spent.
The supporters' response was different. The group who turned up to help with the bomb damage launched a supporters' club, the first in Millwall's history. 4,000 people joined. Their magazine, Focus, ran for 8 issues. The directors saw it as a threat, and supported by the powerful manager of the time, Charlie Hewitt, who had himself previously been sacked for embezzlement of gate money, wound it up and confiscated the funds, the then substantial sum of £900.
We all came down here to a meeting on a Sunday morning, of which the famous manager, Charlie Hewitt, he was on the pitch with some other directors, and there was a hell of a row, and the supporters club was broken up. But about 12 months later, I think it was, it started up again, and we had another meeting, and it was the first time I'd heard the expression, and it came from Charlie Hewitt, the manager. He would agree to the reformation of the supporters club on the condition that the tail must never wag the dog.
Local MP Bob Mellish presented himself as an honest broker. He became president of the supporters club and later of Millwall itself. The newspapers described him as Millwall's #1 fan. He cultivated an intimate relationship with the club, which continues to this day. In the 1980s, the London Docklands Development Corporation, of which he was vice chair, were the club's first sponsors. The tradition of South London entrepreneurs continued with the arrival in 1955 of Mickey Purser, a local car dealer. He remained firmly entrenched for 20 years. Management was poor and results disappointing. Purser became the butt of fans' anger. In the late 60s, his showroom in the Old Kent Road was regularly attacked by disgruntled supporters. Discouraged from any involvement, numbers of supporters continued to organise boycotts and to put pressure on the directors, but in ways that were not always so extreme.
The only answer is you stop away, didn't you? But that don't satisfy you. If you're heart and soul in Millwall, well, then it's obvious that you want to keep coming down. Even when they were losing, I'd still come. I'm disappointed, but what can I do? I mean, I can't lay down outside the director's front door or the director's boardroom, because he's not going to, unless you, well, I have happened where Purser had his garage smashed up in the Old Kent Road. But it didn't do no good, he still stopped here. No, I don't know the answer to that one, really.
Lots of money came in. I mean, they got money for Charlie early in the mid-50s. Where they spent that money, I don't know. Didn't do much on the grounds as such, because always on the terrace and it was broken steps, and you was just getting rough results and no sort of new players, or sort of players who were finished with other clubs and was getting them down here, like, you know, so the ambitions didn't seem to be there.
The club used to do reasonably well. If it was doing really well, then we used to wonder how long it was before the star player was going to be sold, the Keith Wellers, the Derek Posses. If the club were doing badly, there didn't seem to be money to put into the club to boost up its efforts, and so the supporters then used to tell the directors in no uncertain terms what they thought, and rightly so, because it was never particularly close between the supporters and the directors. Most famous chairman, Mr. Purser, was never really liked down here, and that's not so nowadays. Everybody seems to be aware of who the directors and the manager and the chairman are, and seem to gradually becoming feeling part of the club.
Full maximum membership fee. Full maximum membership fee.
From its early years as a mass spectator sport, football results and football comment have been strong selling points for newspapers, especially the local press. Newspapers like the East End News popularised the personalities, analysed the games, and encouraged local loyalties and local involvement. But alongside reports for supporters, there have been reports about them.
The reverse raised the crowd's feelings, and cries of "Buck up, Millwall!" rent the air.
Things began to look ugly at the conclusion of the match. Not only was the referee baited, but a large stone was thrown at him, which struck a lad on the hand.
This is not the first time this season that the referee has met with a discordant reception at Millwall.
Missile throwing and other notes of discord, including foul language, pitch invasions, demonstrations against officials, are all recorded from the early years. Right up to the Second World War, behaviour which would now be severely punished was an expected part of crowd exuberance.
2-3 when Foxall nets. That's right, there's no time to waste. Foxall agrees and promptly repeats the dose. Beating both Ward and Watley, he drives home a beauty which leaves Hooper helpless. Assistance is again at hand, but it's all got to be played again. Result, 3-all.
But even so, Millwall had a poor record. The club was punished by the Football Association on no less than 6 occasions between 1927 and 1949. A game against Bradford in March 1934 was described by Ted Houghton, writing for the Sunday Pictorial. He told how, after the game,
a crowd of nearly 4,000 strong assembled. There were shouts and catcalls, and the crowd began to chant, "We want the referee."
The News of the World had only a small report, but it spoke of exciting scenes and free fights between players on the pitch. Afterwards,
the crowd refused to leave the ground, demonstrating against the directors in the stand. Mud was flung at the windows.
But in court the following Monday, the authorities were tolerant. The magistrate described it as a case of overexcitement. The local papers criticised the scare headlines in the national press. Nevertheless, the FA closed the ground for 2 weeks. In November 1938, the club was fined.
The New Cross crowd threw squibs, crackers and the rest as the players left the field.
There were some occasions when Millwall crowd got a bit obstropolous and let the referee know what they thought of them. And I can remember one match with Bradford City when Millwall won 6-1, where one of the players actually threw, one of the spectators actually threw a bottle at the goalkeeper. So it's not just football hooliganism today. It happened then on occasions.
Post-war, the pattern remained the same.
The morons of Millwall have done it again. The last Football League club to have its ground closed was the Lions. After an interval of 13 years, the chopper has fallen again.
As so often before and since, the local reporter, closer to the actual events, had his reservations.
The South London press did not refer to the matter. That was precisely how important the event looked to me. Had I said anything at all, it would be that the FA should find more efficient referees.
2 years later, yet another referee became the target of fans' abuse and was assaulted by more than 100 supporters outside the ground. Again, the den was closed. But even the national press commented on the game rather than the incident. The football supporter was expected to be noisy and boisterous.
Apart from good football, a feature at the den is the Lions Roar. These supporters rise at the crack of dawn on match days, have a gargle, and are so articulate that they ought to be allowed in the ground free of charge.
There were 42,000 fans at the Den when 3rd Division Millwall played host to their West London neighbours Fulham, while as usual the small boys were passed down to the front before they passed out. And when Millwall appeared, even the Old Kent Road rocked with the cheers of their supporters.
All over the country, football saw huge crowds in its golden era of the post-war years. Crowds that seemed more orderly than pre-war.
Kicked off for Fulham, who straight away went into the attack to avenge that 1937 defeat by the Lions, who then reached the semi-final. Cheer up, Missy. There's no score yet. Millwall forced a corner and certainly gave that Fulham defence some anxious moments. But Fulham scored first. Macaulay centred, and left-winger Campbell made no mistake. Then Millwall, a goal down, just swarmed into the attack. Fulham were content to scramble the ball away. The dangerous home forwards are supposed to prefer hard grounds. No wonder the Fulham fans spent the whole week hoping for rain. second half, and still it's Fulham 1-up. They say the vocal support of the Den is worth a goal to the Lions, but though there was plenty of this, Millwall just couldn't confirm this report.
But although it remained a mass spectator sport, by the mid-50s, those crowds began both to decline and to change. Many men with secure jobs in the booming economy were finding that the car and the home offered a more comfortable way of spending the weekend. By the time ITV came along in 1955, 2/3 of all households owned a television set. But the Football League was reluctant to allow matches to be screened. They believed that the publicity and the fees it would bring would not compensate for the loss of spectators. Nonetheless, television was to become the main way in which people watched football. Partly in response to this new media exposure, the game was becoming more international and more commercial. It tried to move up market and aimed to be more of an entertainment. Supporting traditions, which have always involved crowd disorder, were thrown into sharper focus. Now the younger groups began to stake out territory they saw as their own. By the early 60s, the tradition of the Ends was established, with their songs, chants and rituals. And they caught the ready eye of the press. By the 1960s, the popular press was becoming more competitive, more graphic, more determined to pursue stories which would instantly grab the attention. Now, the relative prosperity spreading to the working classes included working class youth. The newspapers reported the spectacle of these young men and women with their expensive clothes, their musical crazes, and their free time, with a mixture of horror and fascination. A demonology of youth was built up. Teds, mods and rockers, and, of course, football hooligans. A dummy hand grenade thrown into the goalmouth at a Millwall match was just one of a series of incidents eagerly reported.
Oh, what a sad Saturday afternoon. It was another raw, ugly, painful and sad day for league soccer,
Lamented Sam Leach of the Sunday Mirror, while the newly launched Sun led the way in scare headlines. Press overreaction was now making it increasingly difficult to assess reported events.
Flying fists and bottles marked the end of Millwall's unbeaten league run at the Den.
Plymouth fled the Den last night with a smashed motor coach and shaken players.
With the incident after the Plymouth match in 1967, a press vocabulary was being established, which labelled all football supporters as subhuman, crazed and thuggish. The club itself had already identified its younger supporters as troublemakers and had punished them by intermittently raising the entrance fee and threatening to ban them altogether. Now there were regular, stern warnings in match programmes.
Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen and boys. The irresponsible acts of hooliganism by a bunch of youngsters continue to be a matter of grave concern to us.
Please don't let your enthusiasm make you do such ridiculous things as running onto the pitch.
These hooligans must be stopped.
Millwall was forced to act after a highly disputed incident in which referee Norman Burtonshaw claimed to have been struck by Millwall supporters. Similar incidents had happened in the past, but the mood of the times was different. In November '67, the first cages went up at the Den. Millwall Football Club is in an area of London which came off badly in the post-war changes. Traditional industries, in particular the docks, were closed down or relocated. Better-off families moved to the home-owning suburbs. Others were forced to move as the 19th century neighbourhood was transformed by tower blocks. The old community was fractured and scattered. Around the same time, the area was absorbing and reacting to a new group of immigrants, mainly black people from the West Indies. But although the population was radically changing, the vast majority of active Millwall supporters remained white, working-class young men, including many who had moved away from the area, but travelled back to the Den for matches. For some of these supporters, the visible changes appeared to be squeezing out the way of life they celebrated. For them, loyalty to the club and pride in the community often led to contempt towards outsiders. As in many clubs, racism became open, and racist chants became part of the experience of watching football. At Millwall, the reputation and the intensity of the abuse has meant that black supporters have never been attracted in any numbers. All outsiders came to be seen as legitimate targets for verbal abuse and ridicule. Little was done by the club or football authorities to challenge this behaviour.
Immediately after the war, people who'd been bombed out or moved away from Lewisham into Newtown development and places like that, and a lot of other people came who had moved into the area and basically had not got the association with Millwall that they had. In addition to that, certainly in part of the time, a part of an hooligan element developed around Millwall, and as a result of that, people who were normal supporters actually stopped themselves coming to football.
It changed as society changed. You know, people seemed to have a little bit more money in their pocket. Younger people were travelling on their own and didn't come as a family anymore. And they used to converge in groups more. You know, you'd get behind both goals, you'd get your 300 or 400 or 500 youngsters. But they just had no leadership from the older generation that's been passed down like we had, you know.
Millwall is more than a football club, it's a way of life. It offers
As part of the flurry of media concern and fascination, a panorama programme of 1977 attempted to explore the phenomenon of hooliganism by focusing on Millwall.
We're always in the sort of second and third line, but people are frightened of us all over England.
The supporters, best supporters in the land. They go anywhere. Anyone comes down here, they get slung out, I'll tell you that now.
All we're going for is a good game of football, a good punch-up and a good piss-up. That's all about Millwall.
It was an attempt to go beyond the crudities of the popular press, but part of its effect was to reinforce the stereotypes.
Like any other set of supporters, they cheer on their team, question the referee's parentage, exchange pleasantries with the police, whom they call the Old Bill.
It set out to identify violent gangs and explored the theory, widely held at the time, that they were linked to extreme right-wing groups.
At the bottom of the hierarchy are the youngsters. They call themselves the halfway line, and when it comes to aggro, they imitate their elders. But as they grow older, they have a career choice to make. Some of them graduated treatment. They're the ones in the surgical masks. Although one mobs, treatment don't pick fights, but they're always there when they happen. In the trench warfare of the terraces, it's F Troop who go over the top. F Troop are the real nutters, self-confessed loonies like Harry the dog, who go looking for fights and are seldom disappointed. And the scheduled ruck took place.
The programme became part of football folklore. This is the view of Millwall that has become familiar, building up notoriety for people like Harry the dog. But 12 years later, the young man leading the chanting in the film remains critical of their approach.
Well, the Panorama programme done many interviews with Millwall supporters, and when it was actually come out on the telly, it was a little bit one-sided. I mean, we have, as I said before, we have got tough supporters, and a lot of people are proud of that reputation. But they came around and interviewed me, and I told them a few things about Millwall, which they just wasn't interested in, like the Sunday markets or whatever we was doing then. But it wasn't really news to them. It was the same little story. They wanted to jump on the old bandwagon, not Millwall.
Well, after the Panorama programme, a lot of the troublemakers, a lot of the hooligans, started to take themselves seriously, but started to believe their own publicity, and it made them do it all the more. Thought it was just a sort of, a couple of nutters having a fight over there, that's it, you know, police come on, bundle them away, that was it. They actually took themselves seriously, and they went out to sort of start causing trouble because getting the papers...
It became premeditated,
yeah,
rather
cut
than
out to the violence, you know, a little scrapbook and all that sort of thing.
That's right.
Got it on video indoors, prized possession on the shelf in the cupboard, like sideboard. They actually began to believe what was written about them, and after it was...
And the Panorama programme brought all that out. It brought all the bad things out in the people themselves, you know. They made people believe what they was doing was somehow noble, something like that. And really it wasn't. You know, it was just damaging football and Millwall Football Club as a whole, like, you know.
I think the press seem to overdo it. It's mainly because, I suppose, of Millwall. I mean, there's other clubs who've got their bad supporters, but Millwall, you get them and they seem to nail us to the floor. I think even this season, if something had really gone wrong this season, we'd have been nailed to the floor. I think they're most unfair. They seem to overdo it. I mean, the Ipswich game in the cup tie when we lost 6-1, there's a bit of trouble over in the stands, and mainly I think what I see, because I was in the seats myself, that people were just getting out of the way of a bit of trouble over there, and the papers made it out as though there was a riot down there, which was totally out of order. And if I may say this, Robson, who was the Ipswich manager at the time, he really slurred Millwall supporters, which I thought was totally out of order.
On television and in the press, pictures have had their effect. On the one hand, violence has become more visible and less tolerable, while on the other, some supporters have been prepared to glory in the publicity and to act up to the cameras. In fact, similar incidents have become frequent throughout the country. But Millwall lived up to its poor reputation and continued to be singled out in coverage and in calls for punishment. The authorities have come to see the problem as one of crowd control. Measures have been steadily strengthened. Policing is heavy. The experience of going to a football match now includes being herded by police with horses and dogs and close surveillance. At Millwall, the view of the game is restricted by cages and spikes, as supporters are firmly separated. Arrivals are subjected to body searches. A wide range of behavior is now interpreted as hooliganism, and the whole crowd has felt the consequences of a hardening of police and public attitudes towards football fans.
They treat us like dirt. I think for most football supporters, they herd you about, they push you around, they want the slightest excuse to give you a tough time, not just because we're Millwall, because we're football supporters. At home they're okay, because we sort of know a lot of them sort of from seeing them at home games. Away games it's different because we only go out to sort of like see other teams once a season. It's always been bad. I don't know if it's getting much better.
Like, you go, especially like Leeds or somewhere like that, you get the old bill up there, they want to prove themselves, because it's Mill, they are, shit, 27th of April, Millwall, like, that's it. I don't know, they seem to put on their war gear and they just want to treat you like animals. Don't get me wrong, some of us do deserve to be treated like that, but not all of us, and that's what they got to remember.
There are certain police forces in the country who seem to have an attitude of us and them. They seem to think that they try and prove that they're tougher than Millwall, and the majority of people now just want to go for the football. I think like the club's turned around in the past few years. I don't think hooliganism is major at all. I think that a lot of them seem to want a lot of the police do incite trouble. I think that, any bit of bad language, it takes two of them. They come down and nick a little 13-year-old, and that only causes more trouble because people try and stop it.
That was the overwhelming feeling when we come away from Luton. Not that there'd been trouble, but the effect it was going to have in the papers the next day. You knew they was going to give us stick all the time, whether it's justified or not. And that actual events at Luton was actually caused like the Hillsborough disaster, where there were so many people crammed into one end. One bloke climbed over the fence to get St John's Ambulance Brigade man from the other end of the pitch because his mate was getting crushed. He's gone over the fence, everyone's seen him doing it, so they followed him. They all got on their pitch. Once the police had lost control, that was it. They was never going to gain control. The only way to gain control was to get them out of the area.
See, the problem there is, anyone listening to that who's not in any... most people, even if they don't follow football at all, have deep opinions about football and its supporters, will say, they're just apologists, say, oh, you know, is it... But in fact, it is easily controlled, football. There's no such thing as organised football violence. What you've got is disorganised football violence. It was organised, the police would sort it out like that, and do most weeks. There's not fights at most football matches. The overwhelming majority, there's not fights at and not trouble at. But when it breaks down and someone like Luton was too mean to get the police in and also wanted to grab every shilling they could out of an important cup tie and estimated Millwall would bring about 3,000 supporters, they turned up with 10, then they threw their hands up because there was... I mean, if you look, the only bit of footage you ever see of Luton is the orange seats getting thrown at police, which was edited by the BBC. There was actually a 50-minute gap between the end of the game and that happening, but the BBC cut it on as if it was a planned thing, all coming on, fits the bill. Got Motson back out the bar to commentate on it. He had no idea what was going on. There's a riot. But you had too many people in one end of the ground. You got a few numbskulled Herberts come over the fence, a load followed them, police started running away, they chased them, the police chased them back, they chased the police chased them back, and it was all over. Riot. Worst night in British football, photos all around the world. Must have been at least 10 people killed, weren't there, that night? What are we going to do about this terrible football violence? We're all going to be murdered in our beds. You know, I've written a thing once saying it's just a bit... Football is a useful thing for newspapers and politicians. I mean, political football's no mean phrase here. It's a good thing. Law and order, control these football supporters. The football supporters are the sons and daughters of most of the people who buy the papers. But they don't recognise it as that because there's this cartoon image of a football supporter. If you don't agree with me, I'm going to smash your radio.
There were serious troubles in Luton at the 1985 Cup match, both in and around the ground. Local homes were damaged. This was taken to be evidence of the uncontrollable nature of all supporters.
Mrs. Thatcher was enraged to find newspapers filled with reports of Millwall thuggery at Luton, while her own diplomatic triumph at Moscow was relegated to the inside pages.
Luton's response was to ban away supporters, and it provided the Conservative government with the occasion to clamp down on football as a whole.
The Prime Minister is determined to use all her influence with the Football Association.
The culmination was the government's controversial identity card scheme. Even as the club fought its way into the First Division, the newspapers continued to target Millwall, making the most of any incident.
Please God, don't let Millwall win promotion.
'85 saw Millwall in crisis. Hooliganism, bad publicity, and falling gates resulted in the club's near collapse. But Millwall has been resurrected by new policies, new investment, and fresh sponsorship. It has finally given the supporters what they have longed for all these years: success and entry into the First Division. Central to the new approach was cooperation with local authorities to introduce a radical community scheme aimed at bringing football closer to local people. The scheme includes the Over-50s Club, women's football, and anti-racist work in local schools. But it does not address the central problems of football, of which Millwall has more than its fair share. It is not an anti-hooligan scheme. And many of the young men who support the club may well feel there's nothing in it for them.
It's never really been a family game. Like the father will take their son, but it's never sort of... Mothers don't come down here. I mean, there are women down here, which is, you know, good. I hope they enjoy it. But it's never really, it's not really a family club. It's not a family game. Football really is it's for working class men. Yeah. I mean, if women come, it's great. I hope they enjoy it. But you don't have to sort of change everything just purely for them.
The community scheme is a good idea. It's made a big difference to Millwall. I mean, they've managed to attract more youngsters down to the Den, which has been hard to do in the past. And they're doing things which probably I don't get involved in so much outside of the community, like what's it called, a creche where they take the kids before the game, and a lot more with the invalid people, and the players are involved in the schools of Lewisham, and it's setting a good example over, and it's promoting Millwall to people who wouldn't normally get associated with Millwall.
In the school holidays, we like come down and Ron takes us all out and we go like all around and we play football. And like yesterday, we went up Blackheath and we went all through the woods and that. And then when we got to the end, we played a game of football and just go around in the van. And then the day before, we went up Greenwich and played football. Like we just still go, and it's really good.
I've been coming with Christopher here for the last couple of seasons regularly, and he's in a wheelchair. And I was pleasantly surprised when I first came here that we were allowed in to and had a special place here. Over the last couple of seasons, though, that's gradually improving. There's a lot more concern, there's a lot more disabled supporters coming anyway. And also, we've been on to many away trips.
People don't think of Millwall the same way that they used to think of Millwall. It's going to get bigger. Well, I hope it's going to get bigger, and it's going to concern more supporters. But at the moment, he's dealing mainly with sort of like the area, children, and it's aimed at the press, really, and that's good. But I feel it's got to grow towards the supporters more and get supporters more involved with the club and the running of the club.
Away goes Callaghan. Kevin O'Callaghan now with Cascarino in a bit of space in the middle. Can he hold off long enough? He scores! With 11 minutes gone. A goal the home side were desperate for, and their leading striker has provided it. Tony Cascarino.
Well, what a good ball from Kevin O'Callaghan. He played it out early. Cascarino did well under pressure, held off the defender, and then a left foot across, Brian gone into the far corner. That was a super strike.
Millwall 1, Norwich City 2. 3 minutes of the first half remaining. Hurlock to Morgan. Sheringham to Morgan. A great little run by him, and Cascarino, and it's in there by Coulter.
For the present government, football is an unwarranted irritant, a nuisance it neither understands nor cares about, an old-fashioned form of working-class expression that for them is unpredictable and dangerous. But those at Millwall who are launching a new supporters club believe that the solutions must come from within.
Well, basically, it was set up by us as a group, as friends, really to gain a voice at Millwall as supporters, almost like a supporters' union in a sense. We want to be recognised by the club. Of course, we are for the club. We want to represent the man who stands on the terraces day in and day out watching Millwall play. They've got a junior line club. They've got a old age pensioners club, but they haven't got anything representing the supporters.
I thought we used to take people for granted. That's all it was. Oh, they turn up every week. People used to get 18,000 gates here, and they're in the 3rd and 4th division regular. Yeah. We just took it for granted, and over the last couple of years, people have said that's enough.
We intend to get enough members so that we can not start a revolution, but force our way into recognition, and we want to gain representation on the board so that we can have our voice. The council, the Lewisham Council, gives £70,000 a year to Millwall, and they've got representation on the board. Supporters give about £1.5 million a year. We think someone representing those supporters deserves a place on the board.
Thousands of supporters continue to follow Millwall with passion and loyalty. They do not go simply to watch, but to participate. They see the game as theirs. But football's problems remain deeply ingrained in the traditions and structures of the game itself. Like other Football League clubs, Millwall is strongly opposed to the imposition of government schemes. And yet its own community scheme will not convert potential hooligans into the kind of family audience described by television commentators. Few people around here would want the game to become sanitized in this way. It remains to be seen whether Millwall's new policies can develop in a way that can challenge the heavily masculine culture of the game without alienating traditional supporters. But if football's problems have grown out of traditional patterns of support, many supporters feel that the solutions will come out of those traditions too. For those who follow football, the game can provide some of the most inspiring moments of their lives. At present, football itself is under threat, but Millwall supporters are determined to see the game and their club not only survive, but flourish.
Millwall is part of my life. I mean, without Millwall, it wouldn't be worth living. It's part of, it's like oxygen to me. I just have to have it, like, you know. It's just something you can't live without.
You miss them for a couple of weeks, and well, it's like an alcoholic going without a drink, isn't it?
It is a life sentence in the best possible way. It's a life sentence. We know that.
If you're not there, you feel disloyal.
What I feel about Millwall is like I would feel about any of my family. You know, you love your family and you love Millwall Football Club.
I will say now, I'm getting on now, but I will say I will follow Millwall to the end of my life.
It's like a religion. It's like faith, really. You follow them through thick and thin, and you follow their fortune up and down. You're still there week in, week out, and high or low, you're still going to turn up. Whether they play rubbish, you're still going to be there. You can slag them off, but you'll still be there next week.